All right, well, welcome again, those of you joining us virtually and those in person. My name is Dr. Maria Ilcheva. I'm the Associate Director of the Perez Metropolitan Center. And if you can see my pins, I'm doing double duty today. I'm with FIU, I'm a researcher and professor at FIU, but today I'm before you, with you, as the chair of the board of the Women's Fund of Miami-Dade. Many of you know us, have been engaged with us, but it's worth repeating again that we are focused on several pillars, several issues of importance to women: economic mobility, leadership, freedom from violence, and health and well-being. The Women's Fund has been in your community, in our community, for over 30 years now, and we will continue for many more with your support, pursuing the same issues until we get them solved, right? Until we achieve the advancement of women and girls, which we have had as our vision for more than 3 decades. So today is the 5th volume of our advocacy session. Some of you have been in the others. Those of you who haven't, I promise you will learn a lot. But this is the time when we engage with each other, we learn from each other in order to be more effective. And we are at this beautiful facility at my own university, at the newest building, at the newest FIU location on campus. I want to thank profusely to Dr. Agatha Caraballo, a dear friend of mine and a colleague who is leading the Ferré Institute. She has graciously hosted multiple events for many community organizations and has provided her space as a way to pursue her own missions. Dr. Caraballo, you want to say a few words of welcome and about the work that you do?
Yes, thank you so much. And welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Maurice A. Ferré Institute for Civic Leadership and the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs here at Florida International University. We just opened and moved into this facility last year, and actually we're getting ready to have our ribbon cutting later this year. So for those of you who may not know, Maurice Ferré was a former mayor of Miami from 1973 to 1985, saw Miami through some of its tumultuous periods, but also just had a long service of public service as a state legislator, county commissioner, city commissioner, and also mayor. So really by upholding his legacy is to promote civic leadership and engagement, community infrastructure, and social justice. And we do that through academic programs such as certificates, scholarships, fellowships, and as well, of course, community programs. And we're really excited to work with the Women's Fund and, of course, welcome other organizations to come and partner with us as we make our community a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll pass it back to Maria.
Thank you both. I'm going to try and make this camera follow my voice. So let's see what we can do. Hocus pocus focus. Dear Women's Fund, always shining a bright light on women and girls in our community. We have 4 pillars, as you've heard. We've got 4 programs, and one of them is convening. Our focus is our power. Your focus is our power. And your neurons are going to have some good exercise today because we've got 2 brilliant leaders who can stretch the quality of your learning in a short period of time. You can learn a lot in a short period of time. But like everything that the Women's Fund does, this is a participation sport, right, team? So all you 48 folks who are on there, all the people who are still eating their bagels here, it's all about your participation and being a part. So hybrid is not necessarily my favorite. We're going to make the most of it. There are real humans behind the camera. So Viviana is there. You can put things in the chat. I'll be looking at the chat for questions. And if you have issues with tech or anything, just please write it there. You know we care, and we're trying to have a great experience for all you fabulous people here live and all you wonderful, amazing. Look at now 52 people on, and we had almost 200 RSVPs today. So Yolanda Cash Jackson, people care. People care. People care. So you know the drill. We're going to care about the polls. The polls, you're going to use a QR code. If you're here online, your experience will be seamless as it usually is. I want to say that we have often huge partnerships. There are many organizations here. I see faces of people who've got great work that they're doing in the community, and we're always stronger together, as you know. There are two particular organizations that have partnered with us to gather more and more voices together. One is the Junior League of Miami, who's been working in advocacy strongly for many, many years. And Women's Club of Miami, who's got this gorgeous renovated building that they saved. Yeah, I don't know if you know how much volunteering they have done for this community. I don't know if you know that they started the library system here in this community. So we are thrilled to have new president, Metris Batts, and all of her incredible members of the Miami Women's Club joining us as co-hosts today. So on we go. I'm going to ask Yolanda Cash-Jackson to join me here, and we're going to sit down and we're going to hope that these cameras focus well on us. Yolanda comes back up. I want to thank everybody who makes this organization work, our board members, all of our community partners. Thank you for who you are. And on we go. I think we are good to hand it over now. I think we can stop that screen now, Viv, whenever you're ready. And, or Kami, are you driving? There we go. And there's Yolanda on screen. All right. Fantastic. Welcome, Yolanda. Please teach us.
Teach you, okay. I'm not sure all of my business, that's what my mother was saying. Good morning, everyone. I don't know, I guess I'm looking this way at the camera.
It will look at you.
It will look
You
at
be
me.
yourself.
Okay. All right, well, good morning, everyone. I'm Yolanda Cash-Jackson, and often have to explain what I do. I lobby the legislature. Period. Native Miamian, I like to say by way of the Bahamas. I've spent a lot of time on my own family history. And my great-grandparents came here in 1905 and 1908. And so I've spent probably the last 20 years learning more about me and them. So that's kind of what I like to do when I'm not advocating and teaching people what I call how to fish. So today we'll learn how to fish. I think although I represent a number of private companies, I really enjoy working in the not-for-profit space and teaching people how to bring their advocacy alive. So what I thought I'd do is I have about 4 points that I want to share with you. And my dad was a preacher, so I talk in points. You know, that's good. You know, for those of you who understand that. But the first thing I would like to say is that we all need to know our elected officials and who they are. So this is participation. I'm a big participation people. How many people know who their state representative is? Raise your hand. Yes? How about state senator? Okay, how about member of Congress? How about county commissioner? Okay, so not everybody, but most. But the first thing is that you must know who your elected officials are. Just go to your voter registration. I'm not going to even ask you if you're registered to vote because I know you are if you're in this room. But you want to go to your voter registration card and check to see who they are because they have changed. And that's really important for the rest of the conversation that we're going to have. And then you want to figure out what do you have in common with them. We have a record number of women serving in elected office at the state level. And I can find commonality in all of them. If you talk about Anna Maria Rodriguez, her mom worked at my first law firm. I think she might have been 12 years old, something like that. That's a commonality. She has two amazing boys. Commonality. I don't have boys, but I have a daughter. You know, I have a nephew. So there are commonalities through all of this. And then you want to find ways to support them. Now, do you agree with everything listed? How many people are married here? Anybody married? You don't agree on anything. Except that it's the love you have for the common thing is what really makes you tolerate some of their views, because you do agree on, but most times you agree on things more than you disagree. So you want to find commonalities and then find ways to support them, especially women. Especially women. I know we got a guy here, but especially women. And then the other thing to remember is we have a historic number of women serving in the legislative process for Miami-Dade County. Never. I mean, Anna Terry Flores was the only member for a long time. Karen Meek was the only woman for a long time when she came to the Senate in 1982. 1982, before we had a woman of color in the Florida Senate. Don't forget, 1992, before we had a woman of color in Congress from Florida. That was anybody before. I know we had some people born after 1992, but for those of us who are wearing platform shoes for the second time in life, it's a big deal. All right. So we have 3 of the 4 senators from Miami-Dade County that are women. 3 out of the 4. One of them, Senator Garcia, works as chairing Children and Family, a very important committee. Whether you agree totally with everything she does, don't matter. You have something in common with her, and she needs to know that there are women that are supporting her. Senator Kaladihu, she carried the water because of politics and whatever. She carried the water for many of Dade County's projects. Not Republican, not Democrat, but Miami-Dade County. And then I mentioned Ana Maria Rodriguez, who also chaired a committee. Very, very influential women in the Florida Senate. We have never had 3 of them. We should be supporting them. And then on the House side, we have Representative Demi Cabrera, Cabrera, and she is clearly going to be in the leadership role. She has done some amazing legislation. Not all of it passed the first time, but she has clearly been a leader. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then you also have Representative Vicki Lopez, who I've known 20 years, I think, when she literally changed the face of the conversation about convicted felons.
Mhm.
You know, when she was brave enough to come up and say, yeah, me. Don't look, you people don't look like me, but yeah, me. And she changed the face of it. Her advocacy has transcended parties. She got some endorsements this past week from Democrats. Now, anybody know whether or not I'm a Democrat or Republican? Do you know? You want to guess?
Yeah.
You want, no, guess.
Independent.
Bottom line is, you don't know. You don't know. And quite frankly, I'm a Republican. I love everybody who loves me. And that's really, as an advocate, what you have to do. You really have to figure out, you can't stereotype people for what they look like or where they're from or their beliefs, because there is something in common that you have with that person. So the other thing that I would tell you, this is very easy. I'm a pretty simplistic person. You know, don't complicate things. Now, how many shoppers we have? Any shoppers? Oh, I am so bad. I'm on timeout right now. But the point is that the transaction only works if they are selling what you're buying. If you're going to look for red shoes, you're not looking for black shoes. You're looking for red shoes. Listen, this advocacy thing is the same thing. You got to be selling what they're buying. So what is the legislature buying now as it relates to women? We know that human trafficking is a big problem, right? So when I'm talking about girls and I'm talking to a legislator that is concerned about human trafficking, guess what? I want them to know about the girls that are being trafficked. It's changing that narrative. And I represent a lot of organizations that have leaders that are not in the party in control. And I want to give you some of those examples. of selling what they're buying. Case in point, Mary McLeod Bethune statue. Bethune-Cookman University, one of my clients came to me and said, hey, we want to put, I think it'd be really cool if Mary McLeod Bethune was in Statuary Hall. And I thought, okay, well, okay, so how are we gonna make that work? You know, can we say that she was a Black woman? Can we say that she would be the first African-American in Statuary Hall? Would that, you know, rise the vote of the folks that are in charge? Probably not. But when we talked about her being a Floridian, right? And we talked about her work with Teddy Roosevelt, then, because they were buying history. They were buying history. And so we were able to do that. Another example, this past session, we were able to get $10 million from Ferré. That means every year for sickle cell disease. Now, some would say that this administration has not been favorable for people of color. So how the hell are you gonna get $10 million from somebody who won't even like it? How do you do that? But we got to the heartstrings and educated the Speaker of the House. Now, if the Speaker of the House said that sickle cell is important, guess what? You get $10 million. And that's what happened. Dr. Bronte Hall, who started a center in Hollywood, is now going statewide. That's another thing. Statewide impact is very important. Selling what they're buying. The legislature is concerned about statewide impact. You hear it all the time. Miami-Dade is important. But when it affects the state, it's a much different thing. So how do I then, in Dr. Bronte's case, focus on South Florida when they're looking at a statewide impact? You call it a pilot program, right? And so we're going to teach people in other areas what we do here in Miami-Dade County. That's one example. Another example was, for me, medical marijuana. The medical marijuana legislation came out and it excluded a whole group of farmers who the United States courts, the Supreme Court of the United States had said had been discriminated against. And once again, you know, whether or not these descriptions of race are uncomfortable for some people in the legislature. But guess what the name of that case was? Pickford. Pickford was the name of the case. So when we went to get relief for those farmers, you think we call them Black farmers? Pickford plaintiffs, Pickford litigants. Doesn't that sound official, right? And this governor approved, the Department of Health approved 4 licenses just recently. I think it's now a total of 4 licenses for those Black farmers to participate in the medical marijuana process. Only state in the country that has done so. Only state in the country has done so. And I'm really proud of that. You can go ahead and give us a hand. Selling what they're buying. And as an advocate, you have to figure that out. You cannot go and see a legislator and be talking red when they're talking blue. Or yellow when they're talking green. You know, do you have to reinvent yourself? Listen, if you're over 40 years old in this audience, you have reinvented, I said our chair, okay? You have reinvented yourself a number of times. And unfortunately, that's the world we're in. The world is really fast. You know, we have to educate our legislators about, in this case, about women. Women are, you know, we are monolithic. We have all different kinds of backgrounds, all different kinds of abilities, and we want to be able to share it. So let's just talk specifically about Miami-Dade, and then I want to open it up for questions. Miami-Dade is entering into an era of opportunities for the total citizenship of Miami-Dade County and for women. I told you the 3 women that are in the Dade delegation who are in the Florida Senate. And I mean, I love Senator Avila too, but those three ladies. And then we have a woman mayor, our first. And let me tell you, she is active. She comes up to Tallahassee, she is active. Eileen Higgins, she comes up to Tallahassee, they are active. Danielle Cohen, they are active. Marlene Bastian, she talked yesterday about her time. When I met Marlene, she was marching in Little Haiti, maybe 25 years ago. She's an advocate, but she's had to adjust now that she's an elected person of how she advocates on behalf of county. So we have all of these very engaged women acting on behalf of Miami-Dade County. And something very special is getting ready to happen. It's happened 2 other times in my lifetime, one with Jose Oliva and one with now US Senator Marco Rubio, where we will have a Speaker of the House from Miami-Dade County, Danny Perez. Anybody know Danny Perez? Heard of him? Heard of him, right? Heard of him. He's from Miami. He is all about Miami-Dade. He held a summit at the University of Miami earlier in the year, trying to hear what our concerns were, trying to hear kind of how we're going to do this with Miami. This is our opportunity. He's been very open. We need to get to know him. If you live in this district, go visit his district office. If they're having campaign events and you are aligned with some of those thoughts, volunteer. How many people volunteer on campaigns? Anybody? You got to do it. You got to do it. You got to knock on the door. You can do virtual phone banking. That is important. You have to be engaged so that you can talk to them about stuff that you might not agree on. You know, when my husband says pass, but whenever we had an argument and I wanted to win, I just fixed some macaroni and cheese, you know, because I knew that was his hot button. But how did I know? Because we talked about it. He bragged about his grandmother's mac and cheese. You know, she gave me the recipe. Aha, I know the answer. And so it's the same similar concept. This stuff of advocacy is not a rocket science. We know a couple of things. We like to deal with people who we like. Nobody likes a jerk, agreed? Right? Nobody likes people that are rude. And we love to talk about things that we enjoy. I enjoy shopping. You talk to me 5 minutes, I'm gonna tell you about every store in Sawgrass. You know, that's what I do. That's where I walk. You know, if you give me another 5 minutes, I may tell you about my daughter and what she's doing. We talk about children. We talk about women's issues. So trying to find a commonality is very, very, very important. Lastly, the calendar. So we got Danny Perez as the speaker. That means he's in charge. That means like people really literally bow down, even though he's really not that kind of person. But you know, he is going to be in charge of $117 billion, billion with a B, budget that he gets to kind of be the traffic cop of where that goes. We need to be talking to him now, talking to Rep. Perez now about some of the issues that concern us. He's married, he has children, he has a sibling who has special needs, and we've already seen the impact of that. So when do you start this advocacy? Right now, we're in what, June is a good time to start. You don't even have to write a check. They ask us for checks. You don't have to write a check, but you can volunteer. Qualifying is in the next week or so. And so we'll know which races are aligned. And you may not be aligned with everybody, but you know, just knocking on a few doors, sharing information about what you think is important and why you believe in a specific candidate is good. It's good for the soul. Take your kid. I used to take my daughter to knock on doors with me, for her to understand that, you know what, it's a contact sport. People need to hear real life examples. And that's really, really important. I shared a story about when there was an opportunity, well, there was a bill that said teachers should take guns to school. Yeah, it was a bill that said that. And we had a group, an advocacy group, a group of women, happened to be in my sorority. And I told them, I said, look on your card, just what I told you, look on your voter registration card, see who's your senator, who's your state rep, and make an appointment. Now, because they were African-American, they assumed that their representative or their senator was also African-American, but they lived in a very different area. And they happened to live in the district of the Senate president. And that woman went to him, she had been a school principal, and she went to him and said, listen, thank you for the opportunity. You're really good. I know your parents, I knew your brother. As a matter of fact, I taught your brother, and I really would like you not to have me carry a gun to school. And she was in his face this close. If I did that, no, I couldn't do that. She could do that. She could talk about her neighborhood. She could talk about the school. She knew his brother. The question is, do you have those kind of relationships yourself? The test, and I did this the other day. Will the elected official answer your call on a Sunday night? I don't talk to people that I like on Sunday night. I don't even talk to my family on Sunday night. Like, that's my time, right? But that's the test. And you're going to gain those relationships by knocking on doors, by supporting, by sending an email, even if you don't agree. You know, I really thank you for your service. I really appreciate it, but you are way off base, because guess what? Women don't think that way. Let me tell you how we really do. And that's what we want to do. So let's talk about the schedule. Around August, the agencies will start doing their budgets. They kind of already have, and they have set budget items. Every agency, whether it be Children and Family, whether it be Department of Health, they have their budgets that they're going to submit to the governor's office. And then from that, the governor will do his budget. And remember that the governor's budget is fake. It's like, he doesn't have to match, you know? He can just come up with ideas. The legislature does have to have a balanced budget, but they'll start doing that in August. So if you're dealing with any agency, this is a good time to talk to them. They're lonely. Legislators are gone, people are on vacation. You can get through to talk to them. Around November, after the election, shortly after the election, like the next week, then the legislature will go back up to Tallahassee and they will kind of start the process. So you'll have a whole lot of new legislators. And let me tell you something, I shared this the other day. Legislators are not experts until they get to Tallahassee. They get sworn in and then they're expert, right? No, they're not. They depend on you. They depend on each of you to share your life experiences, to share your knowledge with them, because they're just ordinary citizens that decided to offer themselves up for public office and put their face on a poster and get talked about really bad on Twitter. You know, but seriously, it is really, 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 really important that we educate, because they are not experts. And what happens is, by the way, you know who's in their ear? And this ear is the lobbyists that's getting paid to do their position, to advocate for their position. And on this ear are the, what I call the lifers. You know who the lifers are? Those people that are waiting to get that 30-year pension from the state. And we've done it this way, and this is how we're going to do it. And that's what they tell legislators. Well, you know, we tried it this way and it didn't work. This is really how you should do it. Well, sometimes, you know, we had that happen with us with sickle cell. I mean, staff had one opinion, our client had another opinion, and guess what? She's seeing patients, so she could tell them, listen, you might want to focus on treatment and not research. We've researched to death, literally. We need to treat people. People need to be able to go to work if they have sickle cell disease. we need to be able to track them. It's costing the state a lot of money. You know, it's not, we don't need no more research. Not right now. Let's treat them. And the speaker agreed. He agreed. All right, so, November, they get sworn in. December, January, February will be committee weeks. That's the time that you want to go up to Tallahassee. Because it's not that crowded. One session starts in March. Everybody wants to go up there. I'm gonna give you a secret. Go in January and February, when you can get an appointment, right? You're gonna call, you're gonna make an appointment. You can go as a group, you can go as an individual, because you know your legislator. You know, Representative Fabricio is my representative. Senator Avila is my senator. And guess what? Every time it's, that's my senator. I put it on Facebook. That's my senator. You know, because it's important to me that they be successful, because it's important to me that my, you know, my little property values remain good. And they have issues that sometimes they need to have information about. Okay, so March is the start of session. Session is 60 days. They have to have a balanced budget. The governor will submit his budget prior to session, and it doesn't have to match, but it's a roadmap to where he's thinking. Last, a real life example, I represent historically Black colleges. I went to University of Florida twice. I'm a Gator, but my parents both went to historically Black colleges, and they could not go to the University of Florida. Let's get it straight. They could not go to the University of Florida. It was against the law for them to go to graduate school at the University of Florida. And so they went to HBCUs. I didn't have that prohibition, but it was early. It was early, and I still remain very active with the University of Florida in those areas. But my point is, representing the HBCUs, I don't know if you guys heard of the incident that happened at Edward Waters College in Jacksonville, where a shooter killed 3 people near the campus. Guess what? Some of those dorms didn't have locks on the doors. So women's dorms, the windows are low, like they needed some security increases. And in fact, Homeland Security came and did what they call a risk assessment. Simultaneously with that, we were concerned about Jewish day schools. Now, if you know anything about HBCUs, each of those schools are supported by religious institutions. If it's Florida Memorial, they're Baptist. If it's Bethune-Cookman, they're United Methodist. Edward Waters is AME. So what we did, buying, you know, selling what they're buying. We talked about security of religious institutions and religious related institutions. And in fact, the legislature had a special session where they appropriated $20 million for protection of Jewish day schools and other religious organizations. My HBCUs applied for that, some of that $20 million, and the governor put in his budget $10 million for additional security for HBCUs. This stuff. This stuff. Ha! And it was a roadmap that it was okay. And the legislature said, of course. The legislature gave us $20 million because we called FAMU and said, hey, because they're a state school, hey, do you guys have a risk assessment from Homeland Security? Because they did all of the HBCUs in the country last year when there were bomb threats, right? Selling what they're buying. And I'm proud to say, we don't know yet, cross fingers and toes, government hasn't signed the budget, but we had a roadmap. He said 10, legislature said, give him 20. So $20 million, $5 million for each school for increased security. Now, everybody knows that sometimes there's a little tension there with the governor on issues of people of color, at least a perception is. But in this instance, he gets an A. He gets an A. But we had to find that commonality. We had to understand what the legislature was looking for. We had to understand what was important to the governor. And like we do, we made it work. So I'm gonna stop there. Session will be over in May. Probably gonna have a special session. It's not an election year. And so we're probably, that's generally what happens, some type of special session. They want to have a special session on immigration. That didn't work, but I predict that could be a special session. And that's another topic, very complex. Because immigration for us in Miami-Dade County is not just immigration in Polk County. And so that's why we need to have you in Tallahassee to explain that, all right? And then the governor will sign the budget. He has to sign the budget by June 30th. That's the end of the fiscal year. Starts July 1. And so we start all over again. So I'm gonna stop there and answer any questions. I get really excited about this, if you couldn't tell. You know, it's kind of weird, right? You get excited about this stuff. But you can see the change. When you get a chance to take an idea and put it in a method that you can share with someone who is elected, and you understand what they're looking to do, and you can match the two, let me tell you, it's like fitting in that bathing suit. Sorry. You know,
He fits in his baby.
if it's a bathing suit, let me tell you, there's nothing better than to see what that looks like. But no, all jokes aside, this has been great. I want to open it up for questions. Please ask me any questions that you may, no questions.
So I'm gonna help with this a little bit, because I'm seeing online. So I'll tell you all that I'm gonna ask for the first question here from the room. And I thought we had a Q&A, but it doesn't. I need your questions in the chat.
Okay.
And the team will yell at me if I miss any of them. And I've got some that we had from before. And I think I wouldn't mind unmuting somebody. If you want to ask your question personally yourself, we're willing to try it. So would that be okay, Tommy? All right. So first, I'm going to ask for the first question from the room.
Okay.
So there is a huge immigration problem this year, and I have a 501c. I'm Brazilian. I work with the Brazilians, and I'm working as a volunteer for Debbie. And I wanted to also for Daniela, because I found out we have 43,000 Brazilians in Florida who have no idea what it means to elect legislators. Like, even in Brazil, they just think the president or a governor is the one who rules. And so how can I create it? Who do you suggest for me to create a kind of a bridge? I have been meeting these groups of Brazilians, and they live in a kind of a parallel world, meaning they are in the United States, but they're still in Brazil. I don't know if you understand.
No,
what
I
I'm
get
saying.
it.
They're like in somewhere, it's a neighborhood, you know, they don't interact at all. And they're like some big groups that they are there and they don't interact. So how can I create this bondage? And they have a huge problem with immigration. Like you have 43,000, they are voters, but then probably you have 100,000 that they are not legal, but they are here for the last 20 years. So how do you solve this, and how can you bring this to the table for legislators?
So you heard what I said. What do you think? Education, number one. Doing gatherings like this in settings that they're very comfortable with. I do a call on Monday nights with other Black women, and it's a safe space for us to talk about issues that affect us. You might want to do something like that, because one of the hot buttons for Brazilians, I happen to know because I represent the school districts in Dade and Broward. Let me tell you, the ESC classes were full, and it wasn't because of Haitians, wasn't because of Cubans, it was Brazilians and Ukrainians. And there's a cap for ESC. You had to go to the legislature and think about trying to solve that issue. Some people have real strong anti-immigration feelings, but now you're talking about voters. So bringing those voters together to educate them is, you got to do that first. They have to see the importance. Take a small group to Tallahassee and then come back and talk about it. Put pictures, the social media is the best thing in the world, right?
Like what we do with CARE.
Yes.
Once a year, I advocate with CARE in DC. So
Yes.
basically a small thing
Small
like
group.
this.
And where are they located?
For instance, like Deerfield and Pompano.
I know Pompano, I just
So
want to,
it's
you know, I
all
represent Pompano.
and then you have Orlando,
Okay,
huge.
all right, so who are the legislators in those areas? So you're gonna get your group together and you're gonna talk about maybe 1, 2, 3. Remember I told you I'm talking points?
Yeah.
Nobody listens past point number 3. I don't. So, you know,
So the
1, 2,
basic
3,
reach.
right. And invite the legislators in. It's campaign season. If you're talking about Pompano, I can tell you, because I represent Pompano, you got people running for reelection. They'll talk to the wall at this point, if they think that it's gonna be a
I
vote,
know.
right? And invite them in. You know, educate your folks, invite them in to come and speak. If they don't come, you know what to do.
Yeah.
Right? You know, create some social media or communication place that everybody has a safe space. We do a call, you may do I don't know, podcast, whatever. And you got to figure out how to coalesce that group around commonality. Immigration is a tough issue, so you don't have to talk about immigration to talk about immigration. You can talk about ESE classes at Broward County schools. You know, we want to make sure that our kids are able to speak and read English. That's important. You know, then you can start there. So that's education is going to be the determinant. And let me tell you something. If you can do that and create a place where you know you can communicate with those people, and legislators or elected officials know that, they'll stop paying attention. Go to Tallahassee. It don't have
Because I deal more with DC. I have
all politics. is
I
local.
witness against corruption. My case was cover of Wall Street, so I have a big voice in it. So everything that I say goes in all the media,
Okay.
and especially with women.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, I'm trying to create something here instead of being working there, you know?
Right.
And I see there is a demand. There is these people who are like, they're kind of I don't know if the other like Haitians or Venezuelans, they do this, but the Brazilians, they make a kind of, it's a,
Everybody does. Listen. If you're and I'm probably stereotyping, but if you're with Bahamian, I grew up my whole life Saturday morning eating boiled fish. I didn't know why. You know, but boiled fish, that's really hot on Saturday morning. I still do it, you know? So maybe you have your cultural mores that other people may not understand, but it's a way that you communicate with
Yeah.
And so do it in a space where you feel safe. And that's where you start. And don't have to be a lot of people.
then you think Tallahassee, it's better than
Okay, let me
DC.
just tell you why I said Tallahassee. These days, if you listen to what's going on nationally, they're talking about what's going on in the states. When they're talking about immigration, they're not doing it in Washington, because Washington is different than the people that are in some of the and I'll say red states, just for lack of better. They're not seeing eye to eye. They're doing everything locally. They're doing everything in the state that the action is in the state.
Okay.
Yeah. That's easy. Because Washington, and they move slow in Washington. Remember I told you the legislature, they've done in 60 days. Whatever damage they do it in 60 days. And then you need to also probably just, I know this is a nonpartisan thing, so you may want to create a nonpartisan fund, some kind of PAC, some kind of political action committee, so that they can also donate, because money is the mother's milk of politics. Yeah, So you can do that. And that doesn't take, you can do that like nothing. And I'll come, I don't speak Portuguese, but I'll come.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing on some people some days ago, and I think,
Speak as loud as you can for the.
okay, I'm sorry. I listened to you talk, speak some days ago in Summit, and there was something very outstanding. Sell what's divine, point. That caught my attention. I'm the founder of a health technology company, and we help new parents and your babies sleep well from conception and restore sleep to parents struggling with sleep deprivation via a telehealth program and our in-home service. The thing is, I have only had the privilege to work with people that have
Have what?
the means, disposable income, and a
Okay.
large population of people cannot afford it. Even if I've had to leverage technology to make it more affordable, I have people reaching out to me and asking, "You take insurance?" Once we say no, they don't even continue the conversation. You know, we've had to create an innovation and achieve 100% success with every family that was supported. And this women don't experience in postpartum depression. I've had to advocate, even as, a founder, to, institutions and say, you know what? Can you cover the costs, right? Postpartum to these new parents, because this is going to improve productivity and retention of your employees. This is the impact potential of sleep deprivation. When you work employees in, it's tough because they tell me that, you see, not everybody has babies. What happens to the people that still have children? And sometimes it's really exhausted because I tell them that what happens if the person suffering is less productive? The workload comes on the other employees. So it's very
Tired.
it's tiring.
Okay. So I told you my dad was a person. I'm gonna give you a verse. Galatians 6:9. And it should really say, it says, don't grow weary in well doing. You know that. It should say, when you're advocating, don't grow weary in well doing. Because you never know. It's kind of like, if you ever studied the story of Michael Jordan and his dunking, and he talks about how many times he hurt his fingers, he broke his this, and to get to the point where he could perfect that dunk. So I always remember that it was that last time that he, sickle cell, the one I told you about, we had $250,000 and Terry Flores gave us, we gave it to the city, I'm not gonna name the city. And because of some politics, they gave the money back. You gave the money back? He was dying. They gave the money back. You can't grow weary, so that's number one. What I heard you say is that, you can save money, potentially, save the state money. We already said we're not doing Medicaid expansion. So the state is looking to save money. So maybe you want to make a value proposition for why this is important. The other thing is you got the chair of children and family right here in Miami-Dade County. Where you live?
Here, 2 minutes away.
That is Central Center. All right, we're gonna shoot you. I think your senator may be the chair of children and family. How about that? Am I right? No? Yeah, we could talk offline, but, just kind of go back and look at where the legislators are and other organizations that deal with family, children, women's issues. The legislature last year under Chris Browse did this whole maternal health piece. You need to go back and look at that legislation because there may be some grant opportunities in there. And I'm getting kind of in the weeds, but when they do the budget, when the legislature does the budget, sometimes they create these big pools of money that allow you to apply as a 501c3. And even if you're a for-profit company, you can partner with a 501c3 to get them applied to use your services. That may be a better way. I don't know how much it costs, and I don't know how much it saves the state if women can sleep, children can sleep. I mean,
And the women.
yeah, you got to figure out the value proposition, but, you know, we can talk more about it. But it sounds like there are a lot of different ways in the healthcare space that you should take. There's a, Live Healthy this past session. It's I think it's 900 pages or some ridiculous amount. They put hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars into, health. You need to see if you fit in that. Maternal health was funded again. You need to go back and look at that legislation and look at the people that supported it. Some of them are still in the legislature. Health plan support maternal health. You have a big health plan that, well, you have several, but one that I work with, Sunshine Health, they're huge on maternal. So I think you just need to kind of reimagine, what they're buying.
So weeks ago, we submitted the request for solution, for I think the women's health. Some weeks ago, we submitted a request for solution for the women's health sprint, where the government was willing to fund some innovation in
Right.
maternal child health space. Working on another
Okay.
very soon, I think it's a Heroes program. It's a
Are you doing all this by yourself?
I do have a team, but I do most of the writing myself.
Okay, who's your advocate?
We don't have any.
Okay. Ah. So we're gonna teach you how to be the advocate. Because otherwise you just have a piece of paper. You gotta tell somebody. You know, I tell people all the time, I look in the mirror and I say, I am Beyonce, I am Beyonce, and like nobody else thinks I'm Beyonce. Yeah, so that doesn't work. If people don't agree with your position. I think you have a good opportunity. It's just you got to reimagine what they're buying.
Yolanda, got this
Yes.
question to left.
Yes.
Me? Oh. Hi, my name is Adriana Foster. This is a question, and also I want to highlight something that you said that really impacted me. You said that advocating means that you have to sell what they're buying. I've never thought about advocating like that, to be honest with you. I am the founder of Loud Women Nation. We're a program that educates women in emotional education, and we advocate for authenticity in women. So when you said that, it struck me because sometimes I feel like, and I'm sure that a lot of people here are gonna, you know, understand what I'm saying. I feel like I'm advocating for something that I believe so much, and sometimes people don't see it the way I see it, and I just want to grab people and be like, right? But we can't do it. So when you said, you know, sell them what they're buying, it's just, the concept for me is like exhausting. So I just wanted to ask you, because you look so peaceful and so graceful when you say that. So what would be, in your experience, that sweet spot where you find that strategy, for lack of a better word, of how to, you know, convey your message across, but without losing your authentic intent, your passion of why you are advocating for something?
Well, that's a good question. Listen, I'm a 6-foot Black woman from Liberty City with kinky hair. That's not changing. And that's how I mean, that's my authentic self. That being said, I do research the people that I go and talk to. And some of them have some and I'm not gonna lie, there's some people in Tallahassee I don't even talk to because it's too emotional for me. You know, the conversation would go something like, you know, your mama's so fat. No, that's that's productive, right? So I think that you have to be your authentic self. You have to be professional, and everybody's not going to agree. And guess what? When you eat a sandwich, do you put it all in your mouth at one time? No, you eat it one bite at a time. And little progressions along the way is what advocacy is. Really what advocacy. And you're gonna have some bumps and you're gonna have some bruises. I mean, it's your professional self. You're going in as a professional. You're not being rude. You agree to disagree, but there has to be some commonality, and that's why you have to volunteer, and that's why you have to support, and you really get to know them as people, because they were only elected yesterday. They only became an expert yesterday. You've been living it, right? And so that's the challenge. And I've seen people move the needle, not totally, But I've seen people move the needle. I've seen conversations change. We were supposed to have a special session on immigration. We didn't. And I don't think it's just because we said, okay, we're running out of time. That's not what happened. Somebody said something that triggered something that says this is probably not a good idea. You just can't give up, ever, ever, ever. Did I say ever? Ever.
So from our online audience, lots of you excited you're here today. So first one is how can local constituents make an impact in state government from outside of Tallahassee?
Okay, very good question. So every local government has a lobbyist. There are over 3,000 registered lobbyists in Tallahassee. The nudists have a lobbyist. The student government at Florida State, which I'm a Gator, but they have a lobbyist. Everybody has a lobbyist, a registered lobbyist. That includes municipalities. We have 30 some odd municipalities in Miami-Dade County. I would venture to say all of them have lobbyists. So you can start locally with your city commission or your county commission, and they all create legislative agendas, right? So you want to be talking to your local people so that they can put it in their legislative agenda. I advocate on behalf of the areas that this is what you do when you're old, when you have nothing else to do. I advocate on the areas where I grew up. And she knows I grew up right across from Hadley Park on 50th Street and 14th Avenue. My parents bought that house in 1960 for $19,000. I talked to the commissioner, hey, you know, what can I do to help my community? I'm working on Evergreen and Lincoln cemeteries, which is kind of gross, right? To think you work in a cemetery, but that's important to me because my grandparents are buried in Lincoln Cemetery and it's overgrown. Gwen Cherry is buried in Lincoln Cemetery and it's overgrown. She deserves that. You know who Gwen Cherry is? First Black woman from this area to serve in the legislature. That's important to me, right? But that's local. So I saw Senator Avila, and I'm gonna say this publicly. I saw Senator Avila, I said, guess what? I'm gonna be your lobbyist for Brownsville. And I am. He said, okay. Because remember, I told you he's my senator. He's very bright, he gets a lot of stuff done. I need to work with him.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so you see high school? So it's local, it starts local. And then you take it to Tallahassee. And then, you know, maybe Washington, because a lot of the legislators become members of Congress. We had quite a few, quite frankly. Frederick Wilson, Jimenez came from local government. I mean, he was the mayor. Debbie Walker Schultz was a legislator. Greg Stubbe was a legislator. I could go Byron Thomas was a legislator. All those, they started in the state house, and many of them started in local office.
Got lots of questions.
Okay,
adding up
sorry.
now. No, so if you could touch again from here before we go to you, just that same question they want to know, especially vis-a-vis women's needs in the workplace. So interested in how you advocate locally, and I'm going to add somebody else's question. Can you talk about how local organizations can advocate in funding for organizations, and any advice that you can provide would be really helpful.
Okay, funding is tough. We buy everything. How many people see the bags? We have any Gucci bags in here? Louis, okay, look, $3 grand. There you go. There you go. 3 grand. Oh, no, 4 grand. Yeah. My point. You get my point, right? Just, you know, you got to contribute to not only your time, but your talent and what? Resources. We got to learn how to give. Money, if you can't do anything without money. You know, I'll give you an example. We have a group of women that when Warnock was running in Georgia, and they were having some trouble getting people to post. They put 40 grand together for food trucks. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
So people wouldn't get tired of standing in line because they had changed the rules, so it made it really difficult for people to vote. So they got food trucks. Ladies, we can do this, right? And one of the things that I had to learn as a wife, and I'm coming back to the answer, is I had to be the maid, the cook, and the sex goddess. We could do it all. Do it all. And giving is a part of it. Giving is a part of it. That's time, talent, and resources. So that's the answer to that question. And how to get funding it's a process. And if you're a 501c3, sometimes we forget about partnering with other organizations because they're not necessarily getting to the demographic that they need to get to. They aren't getting to young women. They aren't getting to women of color. They aren't getting to young mothers. Young mothers don't have time to advocate, you know, and you can. You know how to get.
Okay, we're going next is Women's Fund.
Okay.
We'll talk to about that.
Okay.
So we're gonna have to go quicker on these. You're next. Hi.
I'm Ms. Valdez, president of the League of Women Voters.
Yes.
Yes, and so I think a very important component of this conversation is access to voting,
Yes.
which is that's the cornerstone of advocacy.
Yes.
It's not just calling, emailing, showing up, but at the end of the day, it's the voting booth, right? And so at the league, we've been very concerned with increased barriers to voting, especially the attack on vote by mail
Yes.
since 2022. So I would love to hear from your perspective. The league, we're doing a lot of awareness campaigns about checking your voter registration status, requesting your vote by mail, that's how you wish to vote, making sure your request is still active, because I need to renew every 2 years as opposed to every 4 years.
Right. Let me tell you, I've sent in my vote by mail and they got it back twice. That scared the bejesus out of me. My mom's 93. I had to have her to sign again. You know, so people are hearing what you're saying. We just have to follow through. Now, let's go back to what we would say the old landmark, old school. How many people have kids or access to, well, let me just put this. How many have access in your family to voters? Like they listen to you. Like my nephew is 33. He listens to me. Like you have kids in the house and you got access to voters. Do they vote? How you know? Huh?
I would say that the ones I know a lot of young people, like, and they're between 18 and 25. And so sometimes they vote because they'll tell me they're frustrated their candidate.
All right, there you go. Women, we take charge of the house. We're in charge of the house, right? We're in charge. Even if you are not in charge yet, you kind of sort of in charge, right? Let's take control of that. What I do in my family, everybody who can vote that I know they lie. Auntie, I'm going to vote. Let me see the sticker. Right?
Yeah.
The first time that I got that from my grandmother. The first time that I went to vote, my grandmother took me to vote in her Valiant. And if you know what a Valiant is, really old. But she took me to vote in her Valiant. And she took my cousin. We were all turning 18 and we voted for Jimmy Carter. We got in that Valiant and we went to St. Paul AME Church and she made us go vote. Ladies, we're in control. We got to throw them in the car and go vote. Let's get back to basics. You want to eat, son? Go vote. You know, I have a 21-year-old cousin from the Bahamas. He's not registered to vote yet, but I take him everywhere with me. I want him to see. We got to get back control of that. We control a lot more than we think. And I think with the advocacy groups like League of Women Voters, if I was to make a suggestion to you guys, I would almost have a campaign of going back to the basics. Mm-hmm. Everybody who you feed, they can vote. If they want to eat, they got to go vote. Mm-hmm. I mean, come on. Women used to be strong and have control of stuff. We haven't really changed. We just gotta, you know, let's go back to the basics. Our family should be able to, you know, we should be able to control families and we control opinion too. We give our opinion, you know.
So we're supposed to be taking a break, but I'm not gonna take the break
Okay.
right now.
All right.
I'm gonna ask everybody here, you didn't do the first part of the poll, so you have to use your QR code to do the poll. And Miss Juanita Walker, who's one of our funding partners,
Okay.
whose Shay's Early Learning is right in front of one of those
Okay.
cemeteries that needs some help, so we're talking after. Miss Juanita, if you would like to unmute, we're gonna try.
I did.
You
Let me
did.
tell you something. I am so sorry I'm not there. This has been a wonderful, awesome conversation. And
Good, right?
my schools are right behind that Lincoln Cemetery that's there. That we're fighting with the county with this and trying to get all of that. As a matter of fact, I met the owner of the cemetery about a year and a half ago, and we were trying to get a group together to help, just improve it and make things better. But more than that, we've started a program, foundation called Empowering Early Learning Educators. Okay, and this is a group of providers that we got together back in 2020 during COVID. And what we do is pretty much so just advocate for childcare centers, our parents in the area because of funding and all there. But, it's been hard to get actual legislators there. We were so blessed on last weekend. Last week we had Senator, and I always say her name wrong, Kala right, exactly. And she was fabulous. She's great, very supportive of what we're doing, and we want to keep it up. But what we're trying to do is to just speak to the legislators. I went to the Children's Week up in Tallahassee, myself and Mappy and others, spoke to some of the legislators too, to let them know our plight, what we're looking for. We need more funding in our area. We need to open it up so parents can get, can afford childcare. And it's been a real tough one, and just getting the legislators and then getting more of our centers in the area of Liberty City, Brownsville, Little Haiti, Miami Gardens involved. That's been a real challenge. So what do you suggest I do at this point? Because we've been doing everything that you're saying, and we're getting some of the legislators out there, but
Go to Child's Week, but do that, but go in January.
in January?
Week, but take another week and go when it's not so crowded.
Okay.
People need children's week. The father of the elevators, no. But yeah, so I would do that. And then keep in contact with the senator. Find out what other projects she's working on. And perhaps you could get her to invite the Secretary of Children and Family, who is fabulous, woman named Siobhan Harris.
Okay.
A woman of color who has worked in ACA, she's worked in Department of Health, and now she has Children and Families.
I know they just changed her. Okay, very good. Okay, Siobhan Harris.
She's been the author of a lot of this work. And what I didn't hear you say, you talked about funding, but there's a thing called redetermination that they're doing for Medicaid. And in those areas, have a lot of people on Medicaid. You need to be involved in that conversation to help them find those parents and help them find those children. So much different than what you just said to me. You're becoming a helpmate because you can identify children and families and touch children and families that they're never going to see.
Okay.
I would suggest that. And if you are in that district, that is Senator Avila is on the west side of 27th Avenue. Even if they don't come, their staff can come. His staff is amazing. And because he's in the military reserves and all, he doesn't get a chance to, come out as much. But he's very concerned about the area and very familiar with the area. And the other part I want to mention to you, historically, that area had one of the most famous daycare centers ever. Jackson Toddland, remember? I don't know, you may be not.
Actually, I'm in that spot. That's where I am.
Listen, I was going to say, that's a whole nother thing.
Yes.
Jackson Toddland for those of you who don't know, Jackson Tyler was the premier early learning center in the Black community for years.
Yes.
And were so advanced that they didn't even go to first grade. When they started school, they went to second grade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Story that you should be telling, and I didn't realize you were in that building. I took a chance and thought so, but those are the
Yes.
kind of things that you can do to elevate your conversation.
Okay.
And Miami Gardens has money, by the way, the city.
Mm-hmm.
They do. I wouldn't put past having a conversation with Mayor Harris and some of the folks on the council there. Vice Mayor Wilson worked with 5,000 role models. She totally gets early learning.
Okay.
You know? Anyway, I went along a little bit, but congratulations, Jackson Tyler is a wow.
Yeah,
Tailor-made.
we're there, and hopefully we're just keeping that reputation up as Shades of Miami Learning Center. So and I enjoy it because of the people in the area, and some of them have been there so long. So we're so blessed to be there. We got their grandkids now. Okay.
Yeah, we should do a Jackson Tyler reunion.
We'll talk about that. We're all in
All right,
study
sorry.
doc. Ms. Juanita is our grantee partner with
Okay.
Women's Fund, and this is our team.
Okay.
So, speaking of team, the
Okay.
humans in the Women's Fund who are running some of this stuff, everybody needs a little bit of a break, but we can edit it later. So I don't know,
Okay.
team, if this works, if you can keep it recording. For those of you who are here, the team can show you where the ladies' room is and stuff. I'm gonna if you can stay just for
Yes,
a
sure.
sec, I'm gonna do another question here.
Okay.
Our next speaker's on at 10:20, so you are gonna need to be human. So use the facilities and get a drink or something as well. But if you're okay,
Yeah.
we'll keep on a couple other questions
Okay.
live. I don't know what your experience is gonna be with online when the team takes a break, but at 10:20, we have an amazing next incredible resource who's gonna take what Yolanda has given us the base for, and he's gonna help us understand what's the lobbying voice and what's the advocacy voice, where what we can do, because we don't want to be quiet as individuals, nor as nonprofits, nor as coalitions like we are with Women's Fund and others. We want to make sure that we advocate as loudly as we can, and we don't want to be quiet because we're afraid that we're going to get our wrists slapped for being lobbyists, right? So all that's coming. So just make sure back and forth, and if it's okay, team, just let it keep on rolling. We can edit it later. And Yolanda, we're going to let this question go next.
We're recent foundations that launched like that in a year. So it's a private foundation for South-Bay Toyota and South-Bay Kia. One of our goals is to educate our neighbors. We are located in South Miami. Is educate our neighbors, the young, about why they have to vote, why they have to know who are their officials, elected, because they're the future. So when we say about put on the sticker, and I really engage with that because I come from Venezuela, and then as unfortunately we don't have the opportunity to vote free. No, we're always willing and we're always happy when everybody can do it. So how we get those young kids be proud to get that sticker from today until the day that they have to vote. So what tips, what examples you can give to us that we can support, and that all of us, because at the end of the day, all of us have to work together.
Young voters are hard. That's the most unstable group, but that's the group that always starts the ruckus. It starts the movement. You have to figure out ways to engage them. They engage very differently than we engaged when I was 21 versus the 21 that lives with me now. He engaged totally different. They're on 2B and they just have different communications, and you're going to have to engage in their world. There was no internet when I was 21. You know, there was no drop the low location, whatever that was. My parents didn't need that. The community was the GPS, you know. And so in finding those things that they engage in, you have some, for better or worse, you do have some folks that they look up to that you can also engage in some of the activities. Take them on walks, knock on doors. They may not be able to advocate for a candidate, but they can advocate for issues. We're going to have some ballot initiatives, you know, have them to sign up to vote, to advocate for those ballot initiatives. Once they start getting engaged, they start paying attention and they have real opinions. I think young people are a lot more conservative than they were when I was young. You know, they're a lot more conservative and a lot more aware. They get a lot of misinformation. So, you know, giving them right information, getting them engaged in things like ballot initiatives where they can walk door to door and let them see what engagement really looks like. And then the last thing I would say, since you're a private fund some of the kids to go to Tallahassee and be interns. And when Kendrick Meek was in the Senate, he used to get all of the presidents of student government in his district, and he would pay for them to go to Tallahassee and stay for a week, and they would serve as pages in the system. Some of those same people became elected. Oscar Brainer was one of them. He went on to become a senator. So that's really important. You have the money. And the other thing I would say to you, because you have private funding, you can engage with not-for-profits as matching funds for them to go get more money. A lot of people don't think about that. So, you know, it doesn't have to be a lot. The average, I won't say average, for me, the sweet spot for funding is probably around $250,000. That way they know you're serious. Well, if you have $100,000 that you're investing in the community, you maybe want to invest in the women's fund, then they can use that as a match and makes their request even better. So she can have her technology, they maybe want to, you know, work with her not-for-profit. So those are things that you can do.
So tech makes me stop these questions here. I know you've got another question. We're gonna make sure you get it. Our next guest is virtual and they have to test
Okay.
cameras
All right.
and stuff. So I want to do it all. Want to do it all. But Viv, if you can try and mute us, but I think we'll go over in the corner here and your question is up. And can we thank you?
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here. I proudly represent the Overtown Children and Youth Coalition. And Yolanda, you have been such an inspiration in so many ways. The Women's Fund and the impact you make is like amazing. As you know, Overtown is, well, probably you don't know, it is Miami's most historic city. Sometimes forgotten, sometimes just left over the highways and somewhere there. But my question to you before you do, how much in terms of advocacy, how much does raise and just getting galvanizing support, because you said, you know, you're from Liberty City and sometimes you're advocating for certain causes. How hard is it to galvanize and support, engage the mind as it relates to culture, race, and demography in terms of them wanting to be a part of the conversation? Because as you know, the numbers need to reflect so that you can apply for certain funding. What are some of the tangible tools that you use to kind of get that support from the company?
So, yeah, first of all, I never use the word hard. Take that. Okay, it is challenging to help people to understand your lens.
Yes.
But it's not impossible. You talk about Overtown. You're familiar with the Children's Initiative.
Yeah.
That was an initiative that started because we went to Harlem with Marco Rubio. He wasn't even a speaker yet. Like I would tease him all the time. You had one car. you know, but he had an interest in children. And he had an interest in learning about the children of then Liberty City. That interest has continued, even though we don't agree on a lot of stuff lately. We don't agree on a lot of stuff, but he continues to be an undying supporter. We started out, I think, getting $100,000 for Miami. Well, they had a fund that he set up when he was speaker. Anyway, long story short, we went year after year trying to advocate, trying to share with them what you're saying, what's going on with the children in Liberty City, the children in Overtown, what's going on? We need to tell you what's going on. But this 2 years ago, because of his calling and, you know, some of the other advocacy, we now have a $4.2 million appropriation annually for those children in Liberty City, those children in Overtown. And that's really, you know, ain't no really right say nothing about race, kind of. Because we were advocating on both sides of the aisle. We know what the underserved community looks like. We do. Code word. I can say underserved and you go exactly what I'm talking about. And those are the kinds of things that we're going to have to adjust. Some people are uncomfortable with race. You're from Jamaica, right? You're Jamaican, right? Yeah, Jamaican and Bahamians. But we have a commonality. We're both from the islands. We have some, and finding that commonality is really what you have to do. Overtown is tricky. Yes, it's historic Overtown, but it's not the Overtown that I knew when I went to, I went to church there, on Coin Temple, 3rd Avenue, 1747 Northwest 3rd Avenue. Every Sunday of my life, I went to that church. And so, you know, but it's changed. My parents grew up Overtown. You know, they had to go to Brown. That's how they ended up in Brown Sub. They put 95 and they all went to Brown Sub. Is race a difficult conversation? Absolutely. All over the world is a difficult conversation. Is it doable? Absolutely. So we just have to figure out the commonalities and move from there. That's what you have to do in advocacy anyway. I don't know if that's real life, but that's what we have to do.
Another round of applause. You taking it
Yes,
for you,
yes.
Alan?
I'm gonna log in so I can hear.
And this is for you, Yolanda. Keep on shining the bright
Thank you so
light.
much. Alan, can I just make sure that your audio is working, please? Hi, everybody.
Sure. Hi. How are you doing?
Okay. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much. Okay, your audio is good, so I think we can get rock and roll in a couple of seconds here. Maria, over to you.
Alan, thank you so much for being here. Yolanda has us all feeling smart and comfortable with our voices. Right? Which is a perfect setup for you, sir. We are going to be asking you to give us the overview, of course, at first, and then to help us to use the voices to advocate and to lobby. So thank you so much, Alan. I know that you specifically come to us with the title often of working with children, but your insights will benefit all of us, whatever area we attain. So over to you, sir.
Well, thank you so much. And let me just share my screen here. Oops, that's the wrong screen. I could listen to Yolanda for hours. I am in awe of her and so grateful for all the wisdom that she shared. And I wish I could be there with all of you in person just to soak it all up. So I'm Alan Madison. I'm a lawyer and I work with nonprofit groups all day long. And my goal with the organizations that I work with is to help people understand how to expand their comfort zone with advocacy. You know, I hear people talk about, getting outside your comfort zone, and that's not what it's all about. It's just about expanding where your comfort zone is and understanding that all different organizations have a different role to play in terms of advocacy. And so that's what we want to talk about, just extending what Yolanda was talking about sharing your voice and making sure that your voice is an authentic voice for advocacy, and making sure that we understand, what are the rules? What are the rules about lobbying and advocacy? We hear all these, buzzwords all the time. At C3s, we know, like, oh, don't go over the line or you might get your wrist slapped. Or if you use money the wrong way, if you use your grant money the wrong way, you might get in trouble with your funder, or you won't get funded in the future. And so people are afraid of getting their toes up to the line because they don't know what the rules are. And so what we want to talk about today is, what are those rules? What does it mean to do advocacy? What does it mean to do lobbying? When can we be strategic with our advocacy to try to be as effective as possible? And so that's what we want to talk about today, is what are some of those strategies? And what we want to do is make this a conversation. I've got some slides to go through to talk about what it is that these rules are all about. But I want to hear from the folks in the room and the folks on Zoom. I've got the chat box open so that as you have questions, you can put them in the chat box and I can answer questions in the chat box as we go along. And so just don't be shy. If there's something I say that's confusing, please, I know I've already seen that this group is not shy, so I'm not worried about that. But recognize that if you have a question, there's probably a half dozen other people that are wondering the same thing. So don't be shy about asking it. So the big picture here is that there's two different types of 501c3 organizations, two different types of C3 nonprofits. A lot of C3s are what are called public charities, and these are organizations that get money from a whole lot of different sources. They're getting money from foundation grants, they're getting money from individual donors, maybe money from the city or the state, and also from companies in the area. And those public charities are allowed to engage in what's called lobbying by the IRS. And we're going to talk about what that actually means and what's lobbying. And the reason it's relevant is, first of all, that public charities have a limit on how much they can spend on lobbying. It's probably a lot more, it's probably a lot higher than you think it is. It's based on a sliding scale, but organizations can spend up to 20% of their budget on lobbying, depending on how large the organization is. And for some organizations, they're spending $1 million a year on lobbying or more. So there's a lot of lobbying that public charities can do. But what's relevant about it is that the other type of nonprofit, 501c3 organization, private foundations, can't pay directly for lobbying. And private foundations, regardless of whether the name says foundation or not, a private foundation is an organization that's funded just by one or two sources. So it might be funded just by a company, it might be funded by something like, one family, or like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is funded just by Bill and Melinda Gates and by their buddy Warren Buffett throwing money in. But what we're talking about here are foundations that have a limited fundraising source, aren't paying directly for lobbying. And the relevance to you all, most of the folks in the room are from public charities that are allowed to lobby. And when your public charity gets a grant from a private foundation, it probably says, hey, you can't use the money in our grant to pay for lobbying. And so what we want to know is, okay, so if we can't pay for lobbying with that foundation grant, what kind of advocacy can we do with that foundation money? And that's a lot of what we'll talk about today, is how to maximize the advocacy that you're doing with those foundation grants in a way that's going to be safe. The things that we're going to talk about today are the restrictions are imposed by the IRS. And so what we're going to talk about today is these IRS restrictions on lobbying that apply to 501c3s. Some of the things I'll say have a different definition than, for example, what the Florida state lobbying definition is. And that's fine. There's some cognitive dissonance in that, where you're like, hey, the IRS definitions don't align with the Florida definition. So there are going to be things that you might have to report if your organization reports state lobbying reports. You might say, hey, we did some lobbying on this. and then, you know, turn around and tell the IRS or your foundation funders, no, we didn't do any lobbying, because of that gap in the definitions between what's lobbying in Florida and what's lobbying in under these IRS definitions. But the important thing to understand, in Florida, some people have to register as a lobbyist, and there are probably some people on the call who might have to register as a lobbyist. But in Florida, you only have to register as a lobbyist if you're principally employed for government affairs. Now, most of you are going to be engaged in advocacy. You're going to be engaged in going to Tallahassee and talking to legislators, but that's not necessarily something that's going to force you to have to register as a lobbyist. Even if you're doing lobbying, you're not principally employed for that. You're principally employed for running your organization, for running whatever services you provide. And if you're doing those things, and that's your principal employment, you don't have to register with the state of Florida. And before we dive into the definitions, the last thing I want to mention here is lobbying isn't for everyone, right? Everyone's organization has a different risk tolerance. Everyone's organization has a different feeling about how much advocacy they're going to be doing. Some of the people might be coming from a research-based entity. People come from government agencies. Others are, you know, might be coming from a church or a mosque, synagogue, all sorts of advocacy organizations within this big ecosystem of policy change. And so what you want to think about is, where am I coming at from this? What's my role in this ecosystem? If you're, you know, the researchers, should researchers need to get out of their ivory tower and talk to advocacy groups and say, hey, what kind of research would be most useful in pushing for policy change? The folks at government agencies can work with the advocacy groups and say, hey, what kind of data do you need? If you're going to be trying to influence policy, we're both working on the same policies, what can we do from the government side that's going to be helpful to you? You know, if you run a Head Start center or a pediatrician office, have a legislator come to visit. And we're going to talk about that a lot more, because it's one of the most powerful advocacy tools you can think of, is getting folks in to see the direct services that you provide. You know, if you're a pastor, preach about these issues, connect interested congregants to these organizations. Or if you're an organization, reach out, you know, get all the folks at the table, get the clergy at the table, get service providers at the table, doctors. The biggest thing here is that it's all about grassroots organizing. It's all about doing that outreach that so many of you are already doing already, right? That organizing is the key to advocacy, and figuring out for all of these different people, researchers, government agencies, service providers, different types of organizations, what role can each of them play? They don't each need to be doing lobbying, right? They don't need to be doing lobbying to have a meaningful impact in the policy change. And we'll talk about how each of these different folks coming at it from different angles can really get involved in pushing for policy change. So I'll pause there for any big picture questions before I dive into the definitions of lobbying. Joan?
Hi, I just have a very quick practical question.
Mhm.
Where can we see if 501c3s are registered as public charities or private foundations?
There's the easiest way to see is by looking at the organization's IRS Form 990. And if in the top corner of the 990, if it says 990 PF, that means 990 private foundation. But even easier than that is you just understand who's funding our organization. And specifically, do we have a fundraising team? If your organization has a fundraising team, you're a public charity, because it means you're doing outreach to a bunch of different donors and trying to get a variety of donors. If your organization is funded just by one company or by one family, you're a private foundation. Great question. Thanks for asking that, Joan. So under these IRS rules, there's two types of lobbying, and I'm going to send around, we'll send around the slides, of course, but I'll also send around a cheat sheet so that you don't have to try to write everything down as quickly as possible. But so there's two types of lobbying. There's direct lobbying, which are talking to legislators about a bill, and there's grassroots lobbying, which is talking with the public to try to influence those legislators. And so a communication is going to be direct lobbying if it has all three of these elements. It's a communication directly with legislators or staff that's about specific legislation, and it's going to reflect the organization's view on that legislation. And so I'll break that down specifically. So we're only talking about direct communications with legislators or staffs, emails, meetings with those legislators, phone calls with them. So for example, I had a client who bought a big billboard outside of the district office of a state senator. And it said, Senator Fernandez, vote yes on S-226 to keep kids healthy. That's not direct lobbying. You know that every time Senator Fernandez and her staff walk outside of their district office, they're going to see that big billboard. But that's not direct lobbying because anyone who drives by that strip mall could see that billboard. So that billboard would be considered a public communication. It's not just direct communication with legislators. So that was a tactic that they used to use non-lobbying money from a grant, right? They're using non-lobbying grant money to pressure that state legislator to vote on that bill. But again, because they are leveraging the definitions of the lobbying definitions here, it's non-lobbying and they could use their foundation grant. So for direct lobbying, we're talking about direct communications with legislators or staff, and it has to be about specific legislation. Most obviously, those are bills that have been introduced, right? If it's a bill that's been introduced, it's legislation. The IRS also says, that would be too easy to circumvent if it was just bills that have been introduced. So we're also going to say that if you're talking with a legislator and having enough specificity that the legislator knows exactly what to introduce, that's going to be treated as direct lobbying also. So if you tell a legislator, hey, Florida families need a higher minimum wage so that they can afford food on the table and a roof over their head, that's a communication with the legislator, but it's not about specific legislation. You're just talking about the policy of raising the minimum wage, but it's not specific enough that they know what to introduce. In contrast, I'll give you an example. So in contrast, if you said to that legislator, hey, we need to raise the minimum wage in Florida to $15 an hour and eliminate the discrepancy for tipped workers by 2027, now there's enough specificity that that legislator knows exactly what bill you want them to introduce. And that would be treated as lobbying if you said to that legislator, hey, raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And so as we're thinking about our conversations with legislators, think about, do we want to spend lobbying dollars on our conversation, or is it better to spend non-lobbying dollars and just educate them about the big picture policy issue rather than talking about specific legislation? So here's an example, right? Is anyone here from Greater Horizons Academy? I should have checked. I assume not, but so here they invited Representative Dunkley in to come visit their childcare center, right? They had her come in, spend the day and visited. You can check it out on YouTube. She's playing ball with the kids. Most importantly, she's talking to the teachers. She's learning about what's going on in that facility. She's getting a firsthand story about it. What I hope, what I don't know, but I hope is, hopefully she also met with a bunch of the parents to find out about their concerns. Because now she can go back and in her work, she's got stories to tell, right? If we as advocates show up and talk to Representative Dunkley about childcare needs, and we hand her a fact sheet with a bunch of data, that data, the data is interesting, but it doesn't tell a story like it does when she meets with this kid. right? When she's playing ball with a kid and she sees that the roof leaks and she talks to parents about the long waiting list to get into the academy and how we need more spots open. And when we talk to teachers about getting subsidies, right? All the things that she can talk about and hear as discussions, those are purely policy issues, right? Nobody in this visit is talking with Representative Dunkley about legislation. So the entire visit is non-lobbying activity. But boy, is it going to have a really strong impact with her when she goes back to Tallahassee to talk about the need for increased funding for early childhood education. She now knows what it looks like when it's done well, and she understands the shortcomings and where we need more money because she understood the stories of being there firsthand in a way that you can't get from a fact sheet. And what I want to emphasize here is, remember, direct lobbying is a communication directly with a legislator or their staff member about specific legislation. And this is not a conversation about legislation. So they set this up as a non-lobbying visit, but it's going to have a really strong advocacy impact. And so what I want people to think about as the takeaway is, sometimes it's really important. If you've got a legislator's ear and you need to push a bill, by all means, talk to them about legislation. You should code your time and charge your time, as their C3 organization, to lobbying activities. But if you've got a time to meet a legislator and you don't want to spend lobbying dollars, you can still have a really big impact by getting them into your center, getting them to serve food at a food bank, whatever the situation is, getting them to meet patients at a clinic and give them that firsthand experience. And it's all non-lobbying advocacy if you're not talking about legislation with them. So any questions about direct lobbying before I dive into explaining what grassroots lobbying is? Or examples that people have had that. All right, well, as questions arise, feel free to pop them into the chat there. I've got my eye on that. So the other type of lobbying, in addition to direct lobbying, is grassroots lobbying. And this is a communication to the public. So for example, that billboard outside of Senator Fernandez's office is a communication to the public because it's a billboard that anyone can see. Tweets, TV advertisements, everything in between. If it's a communication to the public and it reflects a view on specific legislation, and it includes what the IRS defines as being a call to action, it's going to be treated as grassroots lobbying, right? So the important thing here is it needs all four elements to be grassroots lobbying. What that means is, if you take away that call to action, you have a communication to the public that reflects your view on legislation. It's totally non-lobbying unless you put on that call to action. So what is a call to action under the IRS definitions here? Let's go through it. The most obvious one is to say, call your legislator. So if that billboard outside of Senator Fernandez's office said, call Senator Fernandez and ask her to vote yes, that would be a grassroots lobbying communication, and they would have to use their foundation grant to pay. They couldn't use their foundation grant money to pay for that billboard. But because they left off that call to action, it was non-lobbying. Other prongs of a call to action are identifying Senator Fernandez as your representative or providing her contact information, identifying her as being neutral or opposed to our position on the legislation. Now, why neutral or opposed? Because these are all things that give people enough of a nudge to want to contact her. If that billboard said, yay, Senator Fernandez, we're so glad you're going to vote yes. If I'm driving by, I'd say terrific. I'm busy. I've got 1,000 things to do. I've got to take my kids to school and I've got to drive them to their activities after school. I don't have time to call Senator Fernandez. If she's already going to do the right thing, I'm thrilled. But if that billboard had said, Senator Fernandez, get off the fence and do the right thing, that might give me enough of a nudge to want to contact her and tell her what I think. So let me give you an example of how this matters. You want to use your lobbying dollars only when they're going to have the strongest bang for the buck, right? We have limited amounts of lobbying money at our organizations. We've got a lot of foundation grants that say we can't use their money for lobbying. We have a limit on how much lobbying our organization can spend because we're a 501c3. So we only want to spend our scarce lobbying dollars when they're really going to have an impact. So I had a client that was running a campaign in a city to pass a budget ordinance for more money for sidewalks, crosswalks, and public transit. And the client came to me and they said, hey, we want to do bus wraps that call on the city council to pass this funding proposal, but we don't have enough lobbying dollars to do it. We want to spend $100,000 on bus wraps. And I said, okay, so these bus wraps that they had in mind would say, call your city council member. Now, keep in mind, this is a campaign for safe streets and public transit. And I said, guys, we don't want anyone calling the city council when their bus drives by them, because they're going to be in traffic and it's dangerous if they call, first of all. More importantly, no one's actually going to call the city council just because they see a bus drive by them. So what we did is they spent $65,000 on bus wraps that omitted the call to action. The bus wraps all said, our city, I can't say the name of the city, but it said, our city needs more funding for safe sidewalks, crosswalks, and better public transit. City council passed the budget proposal now. So it was a communication to the public because it was on a bus. It referred to and reflected a view on specific legislation, but it didn't have that call to action. So they spent non-lobbying dollars on all of those bus wraps. But they also spent $15,000 on ads in bus shelters. Now, many of you in the room probably already know this, but bus shelter ads are super cheap, right? Those ads in the bus shelters are a lot cheaper than doing bus wraps. But by definition, the people who are going into those bus shelters are the very people who use sidewalks, crosswalks, and public transit. And they've got a phone in their hand. And more importantly, they had time in their hands because the buses don't run often enough. That's why we needed more money. That's why we needed more funding for public transit. So what we did in the bus shelters for $15,000 is we had a QR code and we said, we need more money for sidewalks, crosswalks, public transit. If you care about this, click here and contact your city council member right now. And we could track through the use of that QR code, we could track how many people clicked through, and they could place a call directly to their city council member or email their city council member. And we had a huge engagement rate based off of the $15,000 of bus shelter ads, because those were the very people who needed the sidewalks, crosswalks, and public transit, and they had time in their hands. And so what I want to emphasize here is thinking strategically about how are we going to generate the most contacts to influence city council members, to influence members of the state legislature, to get our policies passed using our scarce lobbying dollars as effectively and efficiently as possible, right? So use those non-lobbying dollars to do things that are expensive and splashy, like the bus wraps that are going to get a lot of attention, but aren't going to generate any calls to legislators. And then when you have a mechanism for you getting calls into legislators, that's where you want to target and focus your non-lobby, where you want to focus and target your grassroots lobbying dollars that are scarcer. So we can talk about some examples, but I wanted to see if what questions people had about those definitions or about the strategies behind them. Or examples of lobbying activities that you guys have engaged in. Well, I want to talk about an important exception if there are no questions right now. An important not even an exception, it's just what part of the rules that I wanted to focus on is what's called the subsequent use rule. And it's really quite simple. What it says is, if you distribute communications broadly to the public that are non-lobbying, you can use those communications later on as part of a lobbying effort. And the underlying cost of those communications will stay as non-lobbying expenses. So if you've got something expensive, like writing a report, right? It's expensive to write a report because it takes a lot of staff time. You have to write it, you have to research the report, you have to do all the editing. It takes a lot of staff time. And then there's layout and printing and publishing costs. So these reports are really expensive. So what it says is, if you distribute your report broadly to the public, and it's a non-lobbying report, meaning there's no call to action. The report can talk about legislation. The report can say why you think the legislation should be passed. But as long as there's no call to action, that report is a non-lobbying expense, and you can use your foundation grant money to produce that report or a fact sheet or an op-ed, anything else that takes staff time that you're going to distribute to the public. So get it out to journalists, use it for grassroots organizing, get it out to clergy, get it out to pediatricians' offices, get it out to PTAs, chambers of commerce. Think about all the different ways you can get this material distributed to the public. That's all going to be really useful advocacy, but you can use non-lobbying dollars to do it. And then later on, you can use that same report when you're going to Tallahassee and meeting with legislators, or when you're going to meet with city council members and hand it to them. So you want to think about the arc of your campaign, think about what materials you're going to need, what fact sheets you're going to need to give to legislators about a particular piece of legislation. And that could be a city council ordinance, that could be in Washington at Congress, it could be state legislature. All of those materials are going to be useful later on for lobby day, but think about, hey, we're also going to need to use these for public outreach. We're also going to need to make sure that all the neighborhood leaders in the neighborhood get on board. And so think about that arc of the campaign and create materials that are going to be useful throughout that campaign using non-lobbying dollars, but make sure that you've got an eye toward lobby day so that you're going to hand out those materials to legislators as well. We had a question from Viviana about the differences between state, federal, and local level advocacy. So the rules apply at any, the IRS rules for 501c3s apply to any type of legislative body. So that could be Congress, it could be a county council, it could be your city council, state legislature, tribal governments can be covered. But what it doesn't include, it only includes legislative bodies. So that raises an important issue that anytime you're trying to influence something that the executive branch is doing, and that could be the mayor's office, it could be something the federal government is doing through the executive branch, none of that counts as lobbying under these IRS rules. So anytime you're talking to a legislator about something that the executive branch is doing, totally non-lobbying. So if, for example, the Department of Health is coming out with new regulations about clean drinking water, you can weigh in with members of the city council, you can weigh in with state senators who might be on the, weigh in with the committee chair of the state Senate committee that oversees the health department and say, hey, health department is coming out with these new regulations, these new rules about clean drinking water. Can you weigh in with the secretary of the health department about the clean drinking water rules to say that they need to be stronger to protect our families? That's not lobbying because it's a communication with the legislator, but it's not about legislation, right? It's about a regulatory activity. It's about something that the executive branch is doing. So it's not legislation, so totally non-lobbying there. We're only talking about legislation, meaning something that's going to be voted on by a legislative body, city council, county council, state legislature. Importantly, the school board, even if the school board is an elected school board, even if it's in partisan elections, school boards are not legislative bodies. So anytime that you're trying to weigh in with the school board is totally non-lobbying, and you can use your foundation grant money to weigh in with the school board as well. Viviana, does that help answer the question that you had? Or are there parts of that I should delve into a little bit more?
Thank you so much. I'm gonna stay off camera, but yeah, I was under the impression that there were certain rules that were different at the federal level, at the state level, even at the local level, and also not just for foundations or 501c3s, but also maybe as individuals, as we're staff members, as the Women's Fund or other organizations wanting to talk to legislators, what can we do? What can we not do? Do we have to register to be a lobbyist? Right? What are kind of some of the rules?
Yeah. So in terms of, each state and local body has its own different rules about lobbying and definitions and who needs to register. And as I mentioned, those don't align necessarily with the IRS rules. But under the Florida rules, the only people who have to register, for example, if you're lobbying in Tallahassee, you only have to register if you're principally employed for government relations. So if you're working at a nonprofit in providing services, doing fundraising, if you run the nonprofit organization, pretty much if you do anything other than serve as the head of their, serve as someone who's hired to do government relations, you don't have to register as a lobbyist in Florida. You only have to register with the Florida legislature as a lobbyist if that's the principal purpose of your employment, is to do lobbying, is to do government relations as the principal purpose of your job. So for most people, lobbying is something that they do as a significant portion of their job, but it's not the principal reason that they've been hired. And for that reason, they don't have to register. Now, the other part of your question was, what can people do in their own personal capacity? If you're off the clock and you're not using your organization's name, you're not using your organizational email address, then you can do anything you want after hours or on the weekends or in your own personal capacity. People can weigh in on anything that they want to weigh in on, and there's no implication for whether or not you can use grant funds, because your salary is not paying for the time that you're spending on the weekends or after hours. There's a whole other realm of issues that arise, which is about getting engaged in elections, which we can talk about in a little bit. But the big picture there is, again, if you're not on the clock, you're not being paid by your organization, you're allowed to do anything you want in terms of volunteering for candidates and campaigns. You just can't be using organizational resources when you're volunteering for a campaign. So you can't use your organizational email address, email account to work for a candidate. You can't send emails to the organization's donor database in support of the candidate that you're volunteering for. It has to be in your own personal capacity and not using organizational resources. The last thing I want to mention before we dive into a couple examples quickly is that if you are testifying in front of a committee, if you're testifying in front of any government agency, it's non-lobbying if you get a letter in advance that invites you to testify, and the letter has to be from the committee chair on behalf of the committee. But it's like a Willy Wonka golden ticket, right? All of the time you spend writing and researching your testimony, traveling up to Tallahassee or Washington, if you have one of these invitation letters, all of your time is non-lobbying activity, even if you're advocating for a bill. The key is you need one of these letters. The letter has to be on behalf of the committee asking you to testify. It can't just be some crazy backbencher saying, hey, come up and testify. It needs to be the committee chair. And the information needs to be available to everyone that's on the committee. It can't just be you and the committee chair writing legislation together. But it's a really powerful tool. And even if the committee chair is hostile to your issue, committee chairs will very often, it doesn't cost them anything to issue one of these letters. So if you get someone else on the committee that's friendly to you to ask the committee chair will almost always do it out of professional courtesy, will send you one of these letters. And then you can go ahead and testify, and it's not lobbying. You can use your foundation grant money to pay for that testimony. And that's another powerful way to do advocacy. Viviana?
Yes, we have a question from the audience.
Sure.
You actually, Alan.
This is the action or a plug, if anyone to, and Yolanda, if you want.
Can you guys bring the mic a little closer to her, please?
Hey, look, right, Yolanda, I'm here wearing many hats. One of them, I'm on the board of Junior League of Miami, sponsored partisan organization, so I won't say the name, but if you want to learn how to knock on doors and meet some candidates, see me after this. We have something this Saturday morning and we just want to help with so you can start putting this in practice.
Well,
that was
Women's Fund is nonpartisan, but you can be.
Oh, Ruthless Miami, we help elect local pro-choice Democratic women to office. So see me after. We need some Cubans, some particularly women, come knock on doors this Saturday morning.
So Alan, I have a question, from the Women's Fund. I don't know, if you'd rather finish your presentation and answer it at the end, just let us know. Interested as running the Women's Fund and looking at financing, billboards, because we are in the business of public awareness campaigns and we're famous for them. So we've had two that I think are not, I know that aren't calls to action. So, and I don't know if we can put them up later, but your voice, your choice, your vote equals your power, things like that. Just talking about, own it and women's empowerment of their voice. So those don't have a call to action, right? So those are not lobbying. Right, Alan? Then we're having some discussions because we believe we have health and well-being as one of our 4 pillars, and reproductive health includes everything. We care very much about maternal and infant health, but we also care about access to whatever kind of healthcare, including abortion that a woman might need in her provider, right? So as an organization, yes on 4 makes sense, but that's a clear call to action. So if other entities were interested in funding billboards that said yes on 4 was a call to action, does that 20% rule kick in, or where does that kick in?
That's a great question. And as soon as whoever it was that just preceded you, as soon as she started talking, I was like, oh, I totally overlooked one of the key bullet points. That, like, as I was in the process of talking about it, I thought to myself, I need to hold that thought. Let's back the heck up here. So definition of direct lobbying is communication with legislators or staff about specific legislation reflecting the organization's viewpoint. There's one exception here, and I'm pointing at my screen as if you guys can see it. Clearly you can't see where I'm pointing, but so that asterisk after ballot measures. The asterisk after ballot measures is key. So ballot measures under the IRS rules, ballot measures are treated as legislation. And it's treated as direct lobbying because the voters are the legislative body. It's like, think of an ancient Greek direct democracy where the voters are the legislators. So if you have a communication to voters that reflects a view on a ballot measure, it's the same as talking to legislators about legislation. So any communication to voters about a ballot measure that reflects a view on the ballot measure is treated as direct lobbying not as grassroots lobbying, is treated as direct lobbying, and you don't need that call to action. So any communication that's going to reflect a view on measure 4 this cycle is treated as direct lobbying. Now, the good thing about that, so you don't have to worry about call to action or not. Just if you're saying anything about measure 4, reflecting a view on it, it's direct lobbying. The nice thing is that the limit on how much a C3 can spend on grassroots lobbying is lower than how much it can spend on direct lobbying. So because ballot measures are treated as direct lobbying, C3s can spend more money on communications advocating for a ballot measure. Now, you need to think about state campaign finance law, and I'm not going to dive into all of that. The only issue here is that if you're raising money specifically to pay for your communications about a ballot measure, that could turn your organization into a committee, into a political committee that needs to disclose donors and things like that. So if you're raising money specifically for a ballot measure, talk to me, talk to Jennifer Bloom, talk to Ron Myers. There's a ton of good lawyers in Florida that can help you with that. But that's the issue, that if you're raising money for a ballot measure, it needs to be handled in a very specific way. But yeah, getting to your big picture question is, yes, it's totally fine for C3 organizations to advocate for a ballot measure. A communication like, and I don't know if the billboards you're talking about are those floating barge billboards that you guys have done about heat and maternal health, which I absolutely love. But if the billboard says your vote, your voice, your choice, your power, that doesn't refer to any specific ballot measure. That's just nonpartisan. It also doesn't refer to any candidates. It's just nonpartisan communications about encouraging voting. And it's totally fine for C3s to encourage people to vote in a nonpartisan way. So you're not mentioning any candidates. You're just saying, hey, it's important to vote. This could be putting voter materials out at the front of a pediatrician's office or at a food bank or at a Head Start facility or at any other kind of early child care facility so that all the parents understand about voting. It could mean that for the week or two leading up to the election, you stay open longer so that parents are able to vote, so that parents are able to have extra childcare so that they can go and cast a ballot. Parents of young children have the lowest voting rates for obvious reasons. It's really hard to be a parent of a young child. You don't have any extra time. And that's why parents of young kids, they just don't get around to voting. And it means that their voices aren't heard in the legislature. That's why old people vote. And that's why Social Security and Medicare are sacred cows in America, because old people vote. And what we need to do is make it easier for parents of infants and toddlers to vote. So anything that your centers can do to help parents and toddlers have more time to vote, anything you can do to encourage them to vote, not telling them who to vote for, just telling them to vote, just giving them information, giving them resources is totally permissible. So there's a lot of opportunity in that. Any questions about that stuff before I dive into some of the examples that I had pulled up?
One, John, yes, live one here.
Alan, where does responding to a candidate or political elected official on their social media platform fall within those two definitions? Because it's kind of both.
So split it two different ways. So did I put in an example of that? If you're responding to a legislator's social media post and it's their official capacity, their official account, and you're talking about legislation and not talking about the elections, that's something that a C3 can do. A C3 can weigh in on the official account of a legislator about policy issues. The closer in time we get to an election, the more careful you need to be that you're not advocating for or against that candidate in a way that the IRS would view it as an attempt to influence the election. If it's the candidate's campaign account, then I wouldn't recommend that a C3 weigh in on their campaign side social media account, because then it's going to look like you're trying to support or oppose their candidacy as an organization. Each of you as an individual using your own personal social media accounts, of course, can do whatever you want on your own time, not using the organization's, sort of the umbrella of the organization. Tell me more specifically, what is it that you were thinking of? I feel like I've answered a third of your question, perhaps.
A lot of elected officials are very much on social media with false information or singing their own praises. And there's a lot of comments. And first, I want to know, do they really read them? But if you do respond, it's looked like it fell in both direct and indirect communication to the public. So, and if you were to do it, say on LinkedIn, and on my LinkedIn, I'm a board member of the Women's Fund, could that be in violation?
Yeah. So, let me sort of pull apart the question. For communications that the organization posts from its social media account, if you're having a communication to the public and you're talking about legislation in that tweet, it would include a call to action to include, for example, to tag that legislator, because that legislator's tag, their legislator's social media handle is their contact information. So if you're from your own social media account talking about specific legislators, it could be viewed as grassroots lobbying to include, to tag that legislator. It's a really useful tool in a lot of situations, and it's super cheap. So it could be a really useful use of grassroots lobbying dollars. In the bigger picture, on this issue of engaging with a candidate's falsehoods in their comments, the risk probably doesn't justify the rewards unless they're directly going after your organization, and then I wouldn't do it in the comments. If, the IRS may, you could draw an IRS complaint from trying to engage and show that an organization, if the organization is using the organization's own social media handle. So for example, Florida Head Start, is weighing in with from their own account with a candidate, you're likely to draw a complaint about that, and it's probably not a high level thing to do. You as an individual, the last part of your question was, you're a board member, your social media account mentions that you're a board member, but that's not the only role that you have. Your communications on LinkedIn or Twitter, even if you work at an organization and you identify the organization in your social media bio, that's not going to be determinative to say that, hey, this is coming from the organization. Your LinkedIn account, even though it identifies that you're a board member, is clear probably that you have a lot of different roles and that this is from your own personal viewpoint. That's why a lot of people you'll see in their Twitter or Instagram bio might say, views are my own, or for example, like something like that. So you're allowed to weigh in your personal capacity, but I wouldn't recommend the organization try to refute the candidate statements. Leave that to a 501c4 organization. 501c3s are probably better off staying out of that specific area. The last thing I wanted to share is just a re-emphasis that as we're thinking strategically, save the expensive activities for non-lobbying dollars. So for example, this op-ed talks about the city council passing a bill. It says the city council should pass this bill on Monday. They're going to vote on the Healthy Kids Meal Bill. It's really good policy. The whole op-ed is non-lobbying because there's no call to action, because they knew that nobody's going to call the city council just because they read an op-ed. But then the the organization that wrote this op-ed layered on social media and email outreach that was to grassroots lobbying to complement all of the outreach that was done with this op-ed. You just want to think about ways to tag team, use non-lobbying dollars for expensive things like op-eds and videos, and then tag team on some inexpensive grassroots lobbying that's actually going to generate a lot of contacts to those legislators after you do the op-ed. I'll leave it at there, and we can talk about any questions people have. And folks on Zoom can just come off of mute. While we're waiting, I just want to flag, the Early Learning Center of Broward shared, they put together this video, and I'll include the link in the slides when I send it out. They shared a video of Senator Osgood talking about how her life had been impacted by their early child care education center. Like, she's telling the personal story. It turns her into an advocate. It turns her into even more of a champion. It uplifts her with her constituents. And importantly, they did it this year, but she's not up for re-election this year. So they were very careful not to do it in a way that was going to influence her re-election campaign.
So she's gonna ask this question, but I'm gonna ask one that. So Senator Alexis Calatayud, who's not up for re-election this year, came to Miss Juanita Walker, our grantee partners, Early Child Learning Center for the Empowering Early Learning Educators session. She came live. She was amazing, and she's a champion that they'll all continue on with. We did a lot of posting about it, as did, of course, the Empowering Early Learning Educators. Would that be considered? What is that considered? Just said, should we not do that in election? What happens?
No, so you're saying that she's up for re-election this year.
Not up for
re-election this year. And she came and talked about the policy issues with folks at the center. She got a tour of the center, hopefully. If she had a communication with the people at the center, it's non-lobbying, unless they talked about legislation. And then it just becomes a strategic decision to say, hey, we've got her ear. She's coming here for some time. Do we want to spend our time and charge our time to lobbying dollars? Or is it more important for her to understand the big picture stories and the big picture policy issues, and we're going to save our lobbying dollars? And that's just, a strategic decision of how much lobbying money do we have and what bills are pending where we need to really interact with her on it.
Would it have made a difference if she were up for re-election this year?
If she's up for re-election this year, then one of the key questions is, are you inviting media in to cover the visit? And how much are you posting on social media to show that she was here and to puff her up in the fact that she's a champion for early childhood issues? And so if she just comes and gets a tour of the center and learns about it, and there's no media covering it, and you're not posting about it, then you're not promoting her candidacy at all. But if you invite reporters and you post about it on social, then the IRS could view that as an attempt to influence the election in her favor.
This might be our final question.
So, as a journalist that has written, with research, has written articles on environmental solutions for the Miami-Dade community, which is the magazine, Impact Edition magazine. You guys have heard about it. And basically, my last article was about a recycling system, and we compared it to the West Palm Beach recycling system because they're doing a much better job when it comes to recycling. So how can I, because I'm not done with my article yet, it hasn't been published, but how can I add in the article a call to action, and what category does it fall in? Does it fall in grassroots lobbying, kind of the journalism approach that comes with research? And then how do we compare it effectively to our neighboring county? and include that in our article with like an effective call to action?
Yeah, well, so the first level is a question of whether or not the newspaper is a C3. And if it is, then it's only going to be lobbying expense if the article talks about legislation and includes a call to action. So as long as you're talking, it sounds like you're talking about the big picture policy issues and decisions that the county has made on recycling and waste removal, and not talking about specific legislation. So you're saying, for example, maybe the county needs to spend more money and invest more money of its budget to handle these these recycling issues, or upgrade its wastewater plant, or what have you. But if you're just saying the county needs to invest more money and to increase its budget, but you're not specifying specifically, we need to increase the budget by this much, or we need to support council member Suarez's program, I don't know who it is, but like, a specific council member's proposal for it, then it's not lobbying, because you're not talking about specific legislation. So you can encourage people to contact their council members to let them know what they think about the county's needs on waste management. And that would be a really good way of engaging people in the community process that's not lobbying at all.
I'll do that. Thank you.
Great, you're welcome.
I think a round of applause for all of these.
Thank you all for having me, and it was really fun hearing all your questions. I'm excited for all that you guys are doing down there.
We're excited to keep in touch, so you're stuck with us, sir. Right?
Yeah, that's
We'll
good.
have more questions. So thank you so much, all of our amazing
Thank you all.
friends. We have another 15 minutes, and I am going to ask Anna Hockemer to join me here. We're talking about a very special issue that I mentioned earlier. The Women's Fund is nonpartisan, and we're not a lobbyist organization, but we do have 4 pillars. And I came from freedom from violence. We have leadership, we have economic mobility, and we have health and well-being. And both economic mobility and autonomy to make one's own decisions, and health and well-being are a long time platform of many, many decades of the Women's Fund, always saying that access to any kind of reproductive health care is absolutely essential for women's autonomy. And that should be women's decisions, not a legislative decision. So to that point, for those who are interested, we've asked one of the leaders of an amazing coalition of individuals and groups to talk about what the Yes on 4 ballot initiative is. And I'm going to let you introduce yourself in context of that topic.
Sure, thank you. Hi, everybody. How are you? It's so nice to be here. I have to tell you, my name's Anna Hockemer. I wear 2 hats right now. I am the executive director of Florida Women's Freedom Coalition, which is a bipartisan PAC, which is working to pass Amendment 4 in the November election. I'm also a local elected official. I'm the vice mayor of Pinecrest, Florida. I'm about to term out. I'll finish 8 years in that role in November. And I got my start in my political life through exactly what you guys are learning about here. I started out as a PTA president. And that's really what led me to become interested in how budgets are made, how votes are taken, how our elected officials, whether they're local, county, school board, or state, work together or don't in order to get our problems solved. So whatever you're doing and whatever your role is, C3, C4, PAC, advocacy, grassroots, you alone with a social media account, just know that it does really take a village. And all of this stuff plays together to create an ecosystem for change. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing and spending the time today. To contextualize what's happening with Amendment 4, after the fall of Roe v. Wade with the Dobbs decision in January 2022, the Florida legislature passed a 15-week abortion ban without exceptions for rape or incest. Not content with that, in the following legislative session in 2023, the Florida legislature passed a 6-week abortion ban with almost no practical exceptions for rape, incest, or the health of the mother. But that 6-week ban was written with a trigger. The 15-week ban had been immediately contested by a number of different groups. The ACLU contested it on the grounds that it violated the Florida Constitution's explicit right to privacy, which we, the Florida voters, added to our Constitution in the early 1980s. So the ACLU's lawsuit started making its way through the Florida courts. On April 1st of this year, the Florida Supreme Court handed down two decisions simultaneously. The first was that it upheld the constitutionality of the 15-week abortion ban. What that means is that the right to privacy in the Florida Constitution does not protect access to abortion. It also triggered the 6-week abortion ban. So as of May 1st, a little over a month ago, the women and girls of the state of Florida are living under a near total abortion ban without any practical exceptions for rape, incest, or death. That is reality. The 4 million women and girls of reproductive age here are living under an abortion ban, and the health consequences are going to be significant. We know because we've seen what happens in Texas and Tennessee and Idaho and Alabama when they impose these abortion bans. The other thing the Florida Supreme Court did on April 1st was approve an amendment to the Florida Constitution titled the Amendment to Limit Government Interference with Abortion, otherwise known as Amendment 3. The amendment to limit government interference with abortion will be on the ballot in November. And it basically says in 49 words and 2 sentences that the legislature in Tallahassee may not restrict, delay, or prohibit access to abortion before viability or when necessary to protect the patient's health as determined by the patient's healthcare provider. The second sentence says this does not change the legislature's constitutional authority to require parental notification before a minor receives abortion services. That's it. And the Florida Supreme Court approved that ballot language, and we will be on the ballot in November. So the hashtag that you will be seeing for the coordinated campaign on Amendment 4 is Yes on 4. And you'll see Yes on 4 being shared by all of our coalition partners. I am the executive director of Florida Women's Freedom Coalition, but our coalition actually for the campaign is a broad group. It's movement partners like Planned Parenthood, ACLU, Florida Rising, SEIU 1199, Florida Voices, which is a smaller group out of Southwest Florida. We now have the Donor Alliance on, and we have the state policy advisors. We are putting together a $70 million statewide campaign. We have donors from across the country, but many donors within Florida. And the polling is fantastic. About 75% of Florida voters reject the 6-week ban, consider it cruel, consider that it causes chaos. The vast majority of Floridians across the political spectrum, including those with no party affiliation, believe that these are decisions that should be made by women and their families with their medical providers, with their doctors, not with extremist politicians. We are seeing our polling hold steady. So as I like to put it, this is ours to win. We need to run a smart campaign. We need to make sure that we're talking to people across the political spectrum, and we need to turn people out in November so that whatever they do on the rest of that ballot, from the top to the bottom, when they get to the bottom where the constitutional amendments are, they feel empowered to vote yes on 4. And that means we not only have to rely on our traditional allies who are registered Democrats, but we have to make sure that those pro-choice independent voters, pro-choice Republican voters, not only understand the consequences of living under an abortion ban and the opportunities and safeties that will be returned to us under Amendment 4, but that they feel empowered to go into the ballot box, whatever their decisions are on any other political race, and feel that they can vote yes on 4. So I've been working on this since last May. To be completely honest, I didn't ask for permission to work on it. I announced that I was going to work on it. And so I think for a lot of you who are in the advocacy world, an important lesson that I can impart to you is please don't wait for people to invite you to the table and pull out the chair. No one has the time, the energy, or the bandwidth to do that. If you think there's something that should be worked on, if you think there's something that should be addressed, do it. It's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. And the other thing that I will say to you is the key to effective advocacy, in my experience, is interpersonal communications and relationships. And as isolated as it can be in the modern world, whether we're at home using Zoom to participate, oftentimes we don't meet the people that we work with in person. It's a big state. It's a big county. Just moving ourselves across the county sometimes can be incredibly difficult. But maintaining those relationships, whatever it takes, coming in person, doing phone calls, reaching out to people, text, email, inviting people, reaching out just to let people know and give people a status update is ultimately what turns into an effective change-making initiative. And that change-making initiative may be a C3, maybe a C4, maybe a PAC, maybe a campaign, right? But all of those things rely on lots of relationships with lots of different people working in conjunction, or at least even in affiliation across areas of competency in order to really effectuate the change that you want to see, whether it's money or policy or both. So that's kind of where we are on Amendment 4. If we have any questions, or if Mario wants to redirect my comments, all yours.
So just for clarification, the Amendment 4 creates a window of opportunity for health issues to be an exception for the abortion, correct?
No, it actually makes unconstitutional the abortion ban. Its title is the Amendment to Limit Government Interference with Abortion. It says that the legislature shall not, right, restrict, limit, or delay access to abortion before viability or when necessary to protect the patient's health as determined by the patient's healthcare provider.
Got it. So it does not include rape.
It does, because if you were, there is no ban up until viability.
Got it.
There is, it is illegal at that point for the legislature to restrict, delay, or prohibit access to abortion for whatever reason, whether it's health related, whether it's an elective abortion, whether it's rape, or whether it's incest. That decision must stay with the patient and the healthcare provider, not the legislature.
So if that creates the impact that we're looking for, then it will give us the opportunity to choose abortion.
Correct. Correct. It would leave the decision in the hands of the patient and the healthcare provider, not in the hands of the legislature. And that is it's an interesting way to posit it. It was not invented out of thin air. It's based on a lot of research, it's based on polling, and it's based on messaging. And so it does not posit access to abortion as a positive right. It's not the amendment for abortion rights. It's an amendment to limit government interference with abortion. Because what we find is that while Floridians are extremely supportive of access to abortion for the women and girls here, they think of it as a limitation on government as opposed to a positive personal right. We can, as individuals, agree or disagree with that framework, but my intention is to win in November, not to be right and lose. So we have an amendment to limit government interference with abortion. And so the other point that I'll make, since I'm talking way too much, is you have to decide as an individual and as an organization whether you want to be right and lose, or whether you want to be pretty good and win. Purity tests don't work when it comes to advocacy, and they definitely don't work when it comes to politics. That's a hard lesson for those of us who've been in the trenches doing the work to interiorize sometimes, but it's important to meet people where they are if you have a specific objective that you want to achieve. You should know what that objective is. You should be able to give state that objective in about 2 sentences. And you always have to make sure that your organization and you individually are doing something to advance yourself towards that objective, not to make yourself feel good or to make a point. Making yourself feel good doesn't solve anybody's problem. So that again, as somebody who's been in the trenches, selling bottles of water for $1 in order to fund something I think is a good idea. Those are some of the hard truths that you should take away from this. It's hard work, and we can't always be perfect, but we can get through.
The other question, sure, Dr.
I'll use my privilege of the chair of the board as well. And using this as an example, Amendment 4, but speaking more in general about how do we cross the aisle in advocacy. In Amendment 4, if you heard the language, one of the words, the main words that the opponents to the amendment focus on is viability. How do we define viability? So how do we get to that point of getting across the message, what that means, and how important it is that the fact that it will remain between the person and the medical provider or within the family and the deity, whatever deity that they focus on. How do we make that advocacy work across the aisle? Not just for the people who agree with us to hear.
Absolutely. So viability is an interesting term in this universe. I think most of us in this room probably know that in the modern universe, we date pregnancy based on weeks. We don't even use months anymore. Trimesters is a fungible thing. When you do the polling and messaging around abortion access, you find, number one, the vast majority of people are completely ignorant about reproductive chronology. They have absolutely no idea how to date a pregnancy. Most people who do support the 6-week abortion ban don't even know that you date pregnancy from the date of the last menstrual cycle, not from the date of conception. So there's a lot of public education that has to happen around abortion access, which is perfect for a C4 or a C3 that wants to be involved in Amendment 4. Simply once people understand how pregnancy is dated, the rejection of the 6-week ban becomes even more pronounced. Now, viability is the highest polling term at which to set the cutoff, because number one, most people think they understand what viability means, even if they disagree about what viability means. The second thing is to understand that there is no one and done when it comes to this sorts of advocacy. We have a 49-word constitutional amendment, 2 sentences long. What has to happen after it passes is that implementing legislation has to be written so that we define what is viability under Florida law, what is a patient under Florida law, who's a healthcare provider under Florida law. Hence, it's not a tattoo artist. If you hear anybody say that your podiatrist and your tattoo artist will be performing abortions on 12-year-old girls, it's not true. Okay? No more so than your podiatrist or your tattoo artist is performing open heart surgery on anyone. It's simply not the case. So there is education to be done around the terminology, but you have to win first in November. And so that's why ultimately when we looked at the data and the messaging, we realized viability was the way to go. And then we will have to educate our voters, educate our policymakers, educate our legislators, educate our C4 and community action partners. And we will have to continue to work on this through multiple election cycles, right, in order to get the long-term outcome. The other thing I hear a lot in my education and advocacy work around abortion access is, well, but what happens after you win and they do X, Y, or Z? Which my response is, they will do X, Y, and Z. It's our job to understand we have to be ready to deal with X, Y, and Z. And so these are long-term, multi-step, multi-year, multi-cycle endeavors, right? That have short-term, medium-term, and long-term objectives that we have to be able to triage and prioritize as we move forward. And that holds true whether you're doing education advocacy, work training advocacy, you're working on reintroducing, people who are being released from jail into our functional society. It doesn't matter what you're advocating. There is no such thing as one and done in the world of public education. That's true for abortion. It's true for everything else.
So we're, those of you who are here, lucky enough to have both bagels and Anna here, so we get to stay for a few minutes longer. It's been an empowering, powerful morning that's gonna last, because there's some basics about everything. We've got a little, you can look up who your elected officials are and research them. Yolanda convinced you, she made you feel comfortable with it, right? Check your voter registration and update your needed information. It is clear that no matter who you're going to vote for, you have the right to vote. And it's not as easy as it was. We're not going to go into why, but my father turns 98 on July 13th. Happy birthday to him. But we're having issues with the voted home ballot, et cetera, et cetera. My brother and I and my father are making an effort to make sure that his vote is counted. So translate that to whoever's, kids you need to babysit, or your kids who are in college or wherever they are, making sure that everybody understands what they need to do and is able to do it, because every single vote counts. your women's fund is truly your women's fund. As we know, and we thank the Junior League for partnering with us today in this advocacy session. Women's Club of Miami, thank you for joining us. And we know you're at the clubhouse and it's gorgeous over there. So thank you for joining us. But we do more things. We had some 50 organizations partner with us last year when we did the town hall with our mayor. So the county mayor proposes a budget to the county commissioners. And she comes and shows us where women and girls are reflected in that budget. Been 2 years in a row, and it's really growing exponentially. We had several hundred people last year. Let's blow it out of the water this year, because hocus pocus focus is true. We need to focus about the things that we see. We're not coming to complain. We're coming to say, we see a gap, we see a need, we see a system that's not serving everyone, because we're looking with the gender lens. It's not the only lens that needs to be applied, not a man-hating bone in any of our bodies. But we're seeing things that weren't built to work for all. So there's a lot of work we can do. We do more work if we're stronger together and you're bringing your issues. So please do join us. You can join us, and Camila is an impact agent as a volunteer. We're meeting quarterly now. And there are more and more calls to action as we get our more and more mature in our advocacy. If you're really into it, we do have a legislative advocacy committee as well. Once again, we're nonpartisan. We welcome all opinions. We do have our basic premises that we care about, and we welcome your voices to join us. So, of course, we can't do this. Viviana couldn't be on screen. We couldn't have a gender equity dashboard. We couldn't have a gender equity index. We couldn't do these convenings, the public awareness campaigns, nor especially we could not fund our grant making partners to make the real change in the neighborhoods. So in any way that you can influence resources coming to your women's fund, we always appreciate that too, large or small. So if you're still here, Anna's hanging around for a few more minutes. And we're going to talk. You all must be hungry. So thank you all. And see you next month. Gun safety for youth is our responsibility, is our topic. And we've got brilliant folks coming to talk to us about that. So see you next month. So we have a few minutes here. And this is really, I think it should be about what you all want to do. And I was going to say for a few minutes, right? Can I just ask you all